everyone, and welcome to California Dream Drives. This here is a 2015 Alfa Romeo 4C. It's a classic Italian two-seater sports car with a mid-mounted engine and a driver-focused design and a proper, stunning supercar appearance. And even though it looks and sounds very expensive, you can now buy one of these in the US market for as little as $50,000. That sounds like the deal of the century to me. Might this even mean that the Alfa 4C is an overlooked supercar bargain? To find out, I actually bought this car, and today we're going to dive into it just a little bit deeper to see what you get and what you don't get in an Alfa Romeo 4C. It is impossible to see the Alfa Romeo 4C and not immediately fall in love with it just from the looks alone. There are very few sports cars out there with a better design than the 4C, and yes, that includes all of those insanely expensive supercars that we all love to drool over. The 4C simply looks stunning from all angles, and it always looks like it's ready to pounce, like a cat just waiting for an unsuspecting mouse to come by. The proportions are just right everywhere you look, and the car bulges and flows like a true Italian exotic. I talk a lot about curves in my videos, and this car is one of the best examples of well-executed curves in all the right places. Fun fact, this is actually also the only one of my cars that I just love to watch. I cannot get close to this car without wanting to touch it and caress it and got a little weird, but the car evokes passion just by its looks alone. With its mid-engine design and the power plant plainly visible under the sleek rear hatch, the 4C immediately leads your thoughts in the direction of supercars. There are race-inspired scoops behind each door, and in true exotic car fashion, they're actually functional and feed air into the mid-mounted engine. There's also a lower scoop on the driver's side, and this one supposedly helps cool the transmission, but it was optional on the cars outside of the US market, so the actual functionality of that one is a little unclear. But it still looks very hot. The rear end has a beautiful mesh-covered rear diffuser, and the dual exhaust pipes look like tiny rocket boosters. And just wait until you hear them in action. Did you hear that? That is just awesome. The single round taillights also scream classic Ferrari, which also means that the car frequently is mistaken by many to be of the Maranello brethren. On the rear right quarter, the almost horizontally mounted capless fuel filler, which sits right on the car's massive shoulder, also helps complete the feeling of a high-end race car, and every fill-up makes you feel like you're doing a pit stop in your own private Le Mans race. Quadrifoglio shields on my car are not original, but I still think they look fantastic. They definitely add to that old school race car feel, and they immediately take you back to Alfa Romeo's racing heritage. They also make you think of another famous Italian sports and race car maker, and that is not a bad thing at all. The front end is perhaps the least aggressive angle of the 4C, but even there, you still get the feeling that this car is something quite special and very exotic. In fact, almost no matter how you look at this car, it is so sexy that it's not just love at first sight, it is pure, unbridled, raging hormone lust every time you see one. There's really only one scenario where the car doesn't look absolutely incredible, and that's when you walk up to it and stand right next to it. You see, the Alfa 4C pulls off a bit of a visual magic trick with its proportions. It is hard to see at first, but the car is tiny. While it is quite wide, it's also short and very, very low. And if you're on the slightly freakishly tall side like me, the Alfa ends up looking a little more like a toy car when you stand right next to it than a true exotic. But that's not all bad, because that is exactly what the 4C is. It is a toy car in all the best possible ways. And while getting in and out of the 4C is not the easiest of tasks, once I'm inside, I actually fit quite well, at least here in the driver's seat. Now, the passenger seat, it's a whole different story. I wouldn't last more than 10 minutes in that seat. But enough about the looks of the car. We also need to know what it feels like to drive it. Luckily, there is one word that covers that feeling completely, and that word is fun. Insane fun. The driving experience in the 4C is visible, but just so much fun. You're constantly being bombarded with glorious sounds from the engine and from the transmission, and your body receives firm and constant feedback from everything that's happening at all times. The 4C is just definitely not a highway cruiser, and is absolutely not a GT either. It's a mini race car, and it exists only to excite you and thrill you, and it does that very, very well. Every second you spend it, or even just around it, is nothing short of exhilarating. The whole car is built around a carbon fiber tub, which makes it incredibly stiff and incredibly light. The exposed carbon fiber door sills also up the cool factor significantly. With its mid-engine supercar looks and its exotic construction, you might be surprised to learn that the 4C is powered only by a 237 horsepower turbocharged four-cylinder engine. Now, that doesn't seem very supercar-like, but the 4C only weighs a hair under 2,500 pounds. That is seriously light. And as we all know, lightness requires a lot less power to be moved. This absence of mass also allows for a 0 to 60 time of 4.2 seconds. And while there may be lots of other cars out there that can beat that time, that's far from the full story of the 4C. This Alfa engine screams to you in a way that no four-cylinder engine has the right to do. And the 6-speed dual-clutch transmission makes you feel like a race car driver, regardless of your skill level. The shifting is absolutely fantastic, both when you take control over the gears with the paddles and when you just let Alfa do the shifting for you. And check out this little lever right here. That's the car's DNA selector, and you'll definitely want to try that out. If you push it forward for half a second, the 4C changes into dynamic mode, which means even snappier gear shifts and much more sensitive gas pedal. And, if you can believe it, an even greater exhaust note too. And if you're brave enough, you can also push and hold the DNA selector for a full 5 seconds. That will put the 4C into full race mode, which is essentially the same as dynamic mode, but without all of the electronic nannies that normally will save you if you happen to enter a turn with a little too much speed. Now, regardless of which one of the modes you pick, there is a little bit of turbo lag present, but this actually only adds to the raw experience. The Alfa never feels sluggish, but when the turbo kicks in, there's a noticeable blast of power, and that just never gets old. Woo-hoo! Just like that. The lightness of the car is also felt at all times, and the steering is direct and full of feel. You simply point the wheels, and then Alfa follows with go-kart-like sensation and precision. The only time you don't feel the lightness is when you're parallel parking, because in keeping with the race car theme and to save weight, Alfa Romeo did not put power steering in the 4C. This means that you'll be getting a little bit of a workout whenever you're trying to turn the wheel with the car being stationary, but who couldn't use a little bit of an extra bicep workout? I know I certainly could. Now, when Alfa Romeo first launched the 4C back in 2015, the first model available was conveniently named the Launch Edition. That car came with almost every option available on the 4C. In addition to that, it also came with an extra set of vents in the very front, affectionately known in the 4C community as the grab handles. My car here is not a Launch Edition, but the original owner equipped it with pretty much every option that the Launch Edition cars came with, except of course for those little grab handles. Equipping the car like that did not come cheap. The base price of the car was $53,900, but by the time it was fully equipped, that price had jumped to $66,700. And while $13,000 in options may not seem like a lot when compared to the infamous Ferrari and Porsche option sheets, it is almost 25% of the car's base price, and that's not nothing. So what do you get for all that money? Well, let's take a look. You got red leather bucket seats, which were $1,000. They look good and they're fairly comfortable, although I definitely wouldn't rely on them for a long road trip. They're only manually adjustable, but that's very much in line with the racing theme of the 4C. It does make me wonder what the non-upgraded seats look like, as I definitely wouldn't classify these here as spectacular. The convenience group was $1,800, and that included premium speakers, rear parking assist, cruise control, and a security alarm. This is probably a package that I would have skipped. The supposedly premium speakers are among the worst I've ever heard in any car. They're so bad that I can't imagine the bass speakers could possibly be any worse. The rear parking assist is a must, but a better option is to get an aftermarket upgrade to a rear camera, which this car actually has. Cruise control was added for the American market, and I have to think that that was done purely for marketing reasons. I can only imagine the meeting at the Alfa factory. Tony, Americans only buy car with the cruiser control. We must have the cruiser control. Yeah, I apologize for the terrible and probably somewhat offensive Italian accent, but I can't think of a more useless feature on the race car-inspired 4C than cruise control. The last item in the package was the security alarm. I guess that's okay. Does anyone really care about car alarms these days? Half the time, I just leave my cars unlocked anyway to avoid any kind of damage from potential break-ins. The leather interior group was the single most expensive item at $2,750. Sure, why not? I mean, who doesn't like leather? It does add a tiny bit of luxuriousness to the car, and I mean a tiny bit, because the 4C is very far from being a luxurious car overall. But the Coupe track package at $2,400 is something I'm very happy this car has. This package gives the car the same carbon fiber mirrors and the body-colored spoiler that the Launch Edition had. They may not stand out much on a black car, but they're still cool. Also cool is the racing leather and microfiber steering wheel. I can't tell you if having a carbon fiber cluster bezel is worth it, because I don't think I've ever even noticed it on my car. But what I have noticed is the race-tuned suspension, which plays a huge part in how awesome this car feels to drive. My xenon headlights were $1,000, and I'm glad that they're on this car. And hiding towards the end of the options list is the sport-tuned dual exhaust. This is probably the biggest bang for your buck, quite literally. This car's exhaust note is intoxicating. like you're going very, very fast all the time, even when you're not. And how great is that? These staggered wheels were $2,500, and they're staggered both in width and in diameter, with 18 inches in the front and 19 in the back. I love the squatty look that creates, and the bowling ball style rims takes me back to the early days of the Porsche 928s. And that's just a look that's super cool, and it works really well for this car as well. For $300, we also got red performance brake calipers, and that's a lot less than you'd have to pay to get them painted red on your own, so yeah, that seemed like a bargain. Of course, not everything is roses with the Alfa Romeo 4C. While the interior does show some signs of luxury, like the leather we talked about earlier, the overall feel is very far from that of a true supercar. The cabin feel is generally cheap and somewhat confused. The center console, well, that's just awful. And so are the buttons that go on it. And don't get me started on the digital dash. It is almost embarrassingly bad. Not that I really ever see it, because it's completely hidden by the steering wheel. From a comfort point of view, things don't look any better. There is literally no place to put anything inside of the cabin of the 4C. There's no glove box, there are no door pockets, and there's no center console space. You do get a tiny little net which can hold your registration and maybe your insurance. And while you do get 2 cup holders, they're really quite awful. And only one of them actually holds anything. The only storage space in this entire cabin is this little pocket right here, and it's virtually impossible to reach. The Alfa also has an old-fashioned key ignition. No start button or anything fancy like that here. And while the car does have central locking, it's the old school kind where you still have to push a button on the key. Hey, Alfa Romeo, I would happily have given up cruise control in return for a keyless entry and a start button. You know, just so you know, when you first get yourself squeezed into the driver's seat and you're ready to go, for the love of everything that's dear to you, you also need to make sure that you buckle your seatbelt before you turn on the car. Otherwise, you will get hit by the single most annoying warning tone in the history of cars. And if you were thinking about maybe using your 4C as a grocery getter, well, you can forget about that as well. Not just because of the trunk size, it might actually hold a grocery bag or 2, but because of the way convoluted method you have to use to access the trunk. Allow me to demonstrate. First, you need to walk to the side of the car, open the driver's door, then look inside of the door jamb. There, you'll find a small little lever. Go ahead and give that a tug. Then you walk back to the rear of the car and you lift up the surprisingly heavy trunk lid. While you hold the lid up with one hand, you use your other hand to grab this little weird hood support. Yeah, it's pretty much just like you used to do with cars back in the 1960s or so. But now that you have it all balanced up, you can finally put in your grocery bags. And what if you have to have more than 2 grocery bags? Well, since it's a mid-engine car, you can obviously just put those in the front, right? Not so much. Because that entire front panel is fixed in place. There's nothing under there. So don't take your Alfa 4C grocery shopping. Don't try to sit in the passenger seat, and definitely do not take the car on a road trip or use it to commute in traffic. All of those will make you cry almost instantly. Got that? Good. With that in mind, why would anyone want a 4C? Because despite all of those things, I'm still totally head over heels in love with this car. A Boxster, or a Cayman for that matter, is a better car in almost every way. But the 4C will make you feel things that a Boxster can't even begin to fantasize about. An F-Type is also a better car than a 4C, and almost as dreamy looking as the 4C. But again, The raw passion and the handling sensation is nowhere near what you get from a 4C. Until now, the most fun car I've ever driven was a Lotus Elise, way back when they first came out. That memory has stuck with me for a very long time. But I think the Alfa Romeo 4C might be even more fun than that. Lewis Hamilton, move over. This car is just incredible. And if you add the absolutely breathtaking looks of the 4C, there's just nothing else that can compete unless you spend at least double or even 3 or 4 times the money that a 4C will cost you. Now, we started this video with the question, is the Alfa Romeo 4C an overlooked supercar bargain? And I think the correct answer here is that the 4C is 2 of those things. It's definitely overlooked and it's definitely a bargain, but it is not a supercar, not even close. It may come close to looking its part, and it actually gets great respect from other supercar owners as well, but in almost every other category, it's very far from supercar levels. The cabin is very far away from super, and the performance and driving experience do not come close to supercar levels either. But that's very okay, because the 4C was never meant to be a supercar. It was meant to be the quintessential Alfa Romeo, which means gorgeous looks and a racing-inspired driving experience at a reasonably affordable price level. So, if you already have a daily driver and you're lucky enough to be in a position to get a second car, go buy yourself a 4C immediately. It is by far the most fun you can have for the money. You will not regret it, and you might just find yourself touching it more than other cars as well. Thank you for watching. Have a great day, and remember, kindness makes the world better.